I never planned to be part of something that got written up in the Galactic Accord's official record. I'm not that kind of person. I'm the kind of person who eats the same sandwich every day for 11 years, who keeps a lucky coin in his left boot, and who believes that most of the time, if something dramatic is happening nearby, it's better to just stay out of the way and let it sort itself out. That was before Vidian Station. That was before I saw the Xylarathi princess standing on the edge of that transit platform, 700 feet above the lower ring, with 3 Korathi soldiers closing in behind her and nowhere to go. And that was before my boots decided, completely without consulting the rest of me, to run. Like the station. Let me paint you a picture of Vidian Station, because if you've never been there, you've never truly understood what it means for a species to overbuild something. The Valorians constructed it 400 years ago. You can tell it was built by Valorians because every single surface is covered in something they consider decorative, curved glass panels that shift color depending on what angle you view them from. Structural columns carved into the shapes of their old gods. Walkways that spiral upward in patterns that apparently mean something about the harmony of space and time, but mostly just mean you're going to miss your connection. The station serves 14 inhabited systems. On any given rotation, somewhere between 80 and 140,000 beings are moving through it, docking, departing, transferring, arguing with customs officials, losing their luggage in the automated sorting systems that work about 60% of the time on a good day. It is loud. It is crowded. It smells like 6 different atmospheres being forced to coexist in one sealed structure, which means it smells like nothing you can describe with a single word. On the lower rings, where the freight comes in, it smells mostly like fuel and something burnt. On the middle rings, where the transit platforms are, it smells like 100 different foods being cooked simultaneously. On the upper rings, where the diplomatic suites sit behind smoked glass and very serious security personnel, it doesn't smell like anything at all, which is somehow worse. I was on the middle ring, transit platform 9. My orders were simple. Escort a sealed cargo container from platform 9 to docking bay 47, sign the handoff papers, and get back to the Terran forward, which was sitting in bay 12 waiting for me. The whole thing was supposed to take 40 minutes. I was 19 minutes in. The container, roughly the size of a small ground vehicle, matte gray, with a sensor tag on the side that beeped every 30 seconds like a nervous heartbeat, was sitting on its magsled behind me. I was watching the departure board, waiting for the transit lane to clear so I could move it across the platform. The platform was busy. It always is. Xylarathi families in their deep blue wraps, children with those wide luminescent eyes that glow slightly when they're excited. A cluster of Morathi merchants arguing in that fast-clicking language of theirs, gesturing at a manifest readout. 3 Sorvath engineers in their orange workskins, leaning on the railing, eating something from a wrapped packet. A pair of Galactic Transit Authority officers, GTA, we call them, standing at the far end of the platform looking tired and bureaucratically defeated, the way all GTA officers look after about their 3rd year on the job. Nothing unusual. Just the ordinary chaos of a station doing its job. Then I noticed her. Aye, the princess. I didn't know she was royalty at first. She was standing near the northern edge of the platform, not at the railing but close enough that I noticed her, because she was standing still in a place where nobody stands still. Everyone on a transit platform is moving, or at minimum, fidgeting with something. A comm device, a boarding pass, a child that won't stop touching the sensor posts. Standing completely motionless in the middle of that movement draws attention the same way a stopped clock draws attention. You look at it wrong and something in your head says, wait. She was Xylarathi. That was immediately obvious. The height was the first tell, nearly 7 feet, with that particular willowy proportion that makes them look like they were designed to exist in lower gravity. Her wrap was different from the ones the other Xylarathi on the platform were wearing. Theirs were everyday things, practical, the kind of deep blue that comes from an off-the-shelf textile. Hers was a different shade entirely, something between blue and silver that seemed to shift depending on how the station lights caught it, with a border pattern that I later learned was reserved for the 6 highest noble houses in the Xylarathi Federation. She had her head turned to the side, watching the departure board with an expression I couldn't read. Xylarathi faces are built differently from ours. The bones sit closer to the surface, the brow ridge is more pronounced, and they have that secondary set of smaller eyes at the temple that can move independently of the main pair. When they're calm, the secondary eyes are still. Hers were moving. She wasn't calm. I almost looked away, almost went back to watching my departure lane. Then I saw the 3 Korathi soldiers enter the platform from the east access corridor. Aye, the soldiers. Here's what you need to understand about the Korathi, because context matters. The Korathi Dominion and the Xylarathi Federation have been in a state of what the Galactic Accord diplomatically calls active territorial dispute for the better part of 200 years. What that phrase actually means in real terms is that they have been fighting over a section of the Venhari system for 2 centuries, pausing occasionally to sign agreements neither side intends to honor before resuming. The current agreement, the 9th Accord, signed 14 months ago, was supposed to be the one that finally stuck. There were 3 of these soldiers. Korathi are built nothing like Xylarathi. Where Xylarathi are tall and lean, Korathi are broad, not just wide at the shoulder, but dense in a way that suggests they evolved somewhere with genuinely punishing gravity. Average height about 5.5 feet, but built like something compressed under tremendous weight. Their skin is a dark gray-brown, almost matte, with visible texture like old wood bark. Their eyes are set deep under brow ridges that look like they could stop a light-caliber round. They were in military gray. Not armor. Vidian Station doesn't allow weapons or full armor on civilian platforms. That's one of the rules the GTA actually enforces, but military gray station fatigues with the Korathi Dominion insignia on the right shoulder. 3 silver chevrons. That's a full senior corporal rank in Korathi structure, which means these weren't grunts. These were people who had been given discretion. They were moving toward the princess in the particular way that means they had planned their approach, not rushing, not drawing attention, just converging slowly, with the easy patience of people who have done this kind of thing before, and know that patience is the weapon that doesn't show up on sensors. The GTA officers at the far end of the platform were watching the departure board. The Sorvath engineers were still eating. The Morathi merchants were still arguing. Nobody else was watching. I was watching. IV, the platform edge. She moved before they reached her. I'll give her that. She was aware her secondary eyes had been tracking them, probably from the moment they entered the platform, maybe before. When they were still 15 feet away, she turned and walked north, away from the main platform body, toward the observation rail. The observation rail runs along the northern edge of Platform 9. It's a safety barrier about waist height on a Xylarathi, made of the same translucent composite material they use for the platform floor. You can see through it, which means you can also see through it to what's 700 feet below. The lower ring of Vidian Station. Freight bays, fuel conduits, the slow crawl of cargo haulers making their approaches. She walked to the rail and stopped, because there was nowhere else to go. The rail was behind her. The platform was in front of her, and the 3 Korathi soldiers were now between her and the platform. I watched them slow down, spread out just slightly into a loose arc, still unhurried, still silent. She said something. I was maybe 60 feet away and the platform noise swallowed most of it, but I caught the tone. It was the tone of someone who has been raised to speak with authority, and is using that authority now clearly, precisely, like a formal instrument. Not pleading, stating. The soldier in the center responded. I didn't catch the words, but I caught the way the other two moved a half step forward when he said it, the way a sentence can be a signal. Her secondary eyes went still. That's when I understood that she was scared. And that's when my boots stopped asking me for permission. The run. I want to be honest with you about what was going through my head as I crossed that platform. It wasn't bravery. I want to be clear about that because bravery is a word that implies you've assessed the situation, determined the risk, and made a rational decision to proceed despite that risk. What I did was not that. What happened was closer to what happens when you see a child step into traffic. Your body acts before your brain has finished running the calculation, and by the time you've decided whether it was a good idea, you're already in the middle of the road. My mag sled was still sitting where I'd left it. I left it. I know. I left a sealed Terran military cargo container unsecured on a transit platform. I will deal with that in the after-action report. I crossed 60 feet of crowded transit platform in about 4 seconds, which is not a number I would have told you I was capable of before that moment. I'm 6 feet even, 190 pounds, and I've been doing standard-issue tech fitness training for 6 years, which means I'm functional but not exceptional. But there's something that happens to the human body when the threat response fully engages, when your brain stops managing the energy reserves and just opens the valve. And whatever that something is, it was happening to me at that moment. The 3 Korathi soldiers heard me coming. The 2 on the outside turned first, then the one in the center. I did not stop. The landing. I hit the space between them and the princess at a full run, and then, because I had not thought beyond get there, I had to improvise what happened next. What I did was, I stopped, turned around to face them and smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an apologetic smile, a real one, the kind that sits comfortably on your face because your body is running on too much adrenaline to produce anything complicated. The 3 Korathi soldiers stared at me. I was standing roughly at the princess's shoulder. She was about 8 inches taller than me, with my back to the observation rail and my hands loose at my sides, and I was smiling at 3 people who outweighed me by a collective 400 pounds, and almost certainly had significantly more combat experience than me. And I was smiling, and I said, "Hey." That's it, that's what I said, hey. The center soldier, I later learned his name was Senior Corporal Veth Darun, and he was exactly as experienced and unpleasant as he looked, stared at me for a full 2 seconds with an expression I can only describe as confused irritation. Then he said in standard galactic, "Step aside, Terran. This does not concern your species." And I said, "Probably not. But I'm here now, so." And I kept smiling. The machinery. This is the part I want to explain carefully, because I think it gets misunderstood when people hear about it later. There's a theory, I've heard it described in military briefings, in xenoanthropology lectures, in late-night conversations in station bars, that humans unsettle certain galactic species not because of our strength or our technology, but because of our behavioral unpredictability. We don't always respond to threat in the ways that make sense. Most species, when confronted by a superior force in a confined space with no tactical options, do something recognizable. They comply. They bargain. They display submission signals. They calculate odds and act rationally on those odds. This is what any thinking being does when they understand that the math doesn't favor them. I was one human, 3 Korathi soldiers. The math was not hard. But here's the thing about humans that other species, even after all this time in the galactic community, still don't entirely know what to do with. We have this mechanism in our heads that can, under specific conditions of perceived threat to ourselves or others, completely override the rational calculation. It doesn't disable fear. I was afraid. My hands were shaking slightly. I could feel it in my fingertips. But it puts the fear behind a wall and puts something else in front. And that something else looks, to outside observers, like either extraordinary courage or catastrophic stupidity. And the distinction between those two things is often just outcome. The Korathi are a species built on hierarchy and predictable response. 3 of them, one of me, confined space, station full of witnesses. The expected move was immediate compliance. My not complying didn't just mean I was going to be a problem. It meant I had introduced an unknown variable into a situation they had planned carefully. And unknown variables on diplomatic transit platforms have consequences that could reach all the way up to the 9th Accord. Senior Corporal Darun knew this. I could see it in the way his eyes, those deep-set, calculating Korathi eyes, were doing a very rapid assessment that wasn't about me. It was about the GTA officers at the far end of the platform. It was about the Sorvith engineers who had stopped eating and were now watching. It was about the sensor pods on the ceiling that were always recording. I was still smiling. He knew I knew. VIII. The minutes. I'm going to tell you what those next few minutes actually felt like, because the official report describes them in terms of standoff maintained for 7.4 minutes, which is technically accurate and completely fails to convey what 7.4 minutes feels like when you are standing 6 inches from an observation rail, 700 feet up, with 3 hostile soldiers watching you, and the only thing between you and several very bad outcomes is the fact that you haven't stopped smiling. It feels long. The princess was behind me and to my left. I couldn't look at her directly. Taking my eyes off Darun felt inadvisable, but I was aware of her in the peripheral way you become aware of people who are also in danger, this heightened sense of their presence and their breathing. She was very still. She was not trying to run. I think she understood, the way people who grew up understanding political situations understand, that any sudden movement would give the soldiers a pretext to move, and that right now, the situation had locked itself into a kind of fragile equilibrium that held only as long as everyone kept being careful. I was being careful in my own way. Darun tried to talk to me. This was his first real attempt at a solution after the smile hadn't worked. He told me I was interfering in Korathi Dominion internal security operations. I said I wasn't aware there were any Korathi Dominion internal security operations on a civilian GTA transit platform. He told me this was a matter of Korathi sovereign jurisdiction. I said that Vidian Station was a GTA neutral facility under the Galactic Accord. He looked at me with genuine dislike and said, "You know what you are doing, Terran." I said, "Standing here mostly." I kept smiling. The Sorvith engineers had put their food away entirely and were watching openly now. One of them, I could see this from the edge of my vision, had activated a comm device. The Morathi merchants had gone quiet. One of the GTA officers had finally noticed that something was happening and was making his way along the platform toward us at the careful, unhurried pace of someone who is very aware that this could become an incident they will have to write about for a long time. Darun was watching the GTA officer. I was watching Darun. The other 2 soldiers were watching me. I kept smiling. IX the machines. 700 feet below Transit Platform 9, the automated freight systems of Vidian Station's lower ring operate without pause. Cargo haulers on mag rails, sorting algorithms processing 10,000 items per hour, atmospheric processors cycling air through ducts as wide as buildings. I know this because I was very aware of all of it below the rail behind me. At some point during those 7.4 minutes, I had become acutely conscious of the gap between the bottom of the rail and the platform floor, about 14 inches, wide enough. I was also aware that Korathi soldiers in civilian station fatigues are not carrying their standard-issue weapons, but they are built like something the universe decided to make specifically for close-quarters physical confrontation, and 3 of them against 1 of me was not a fight. It was a brief exercise. All of this was at the back of my mind, running continuously, while the front of my mind held the smile. The front of my mind was also running something else. A very simple human calculation that I think gets underestimated in most galactic tactical analyses of human behavior. I was thinking, if I move, it gets physical, and physical is bad. If they move, it gets visible, and visible is bad for them. Neither of us can move, so nobody moves. And if nobody moves long enough, the GTA officer gets here, and then it becomes his problem. Simple human, correct. The GTA officer. His name was Inspector Halath. He was a Valorian, which meant he was about 5 feet tall, blue-gray in coloration, with those large oval eyes that are either serene or deeply exhausted depending on how long his shift has been. And his had been very long. He arrived at our small gathering looking like a man who has seen everything the universe can produce in the way of transit platform incidents, and has never once been surprised, and has never once been pleased about it either. He looked at me. He looked at the 3 Korathi soldiers. He looked at the princess behind me. Then he looked back at the soldiers and said, in a voice that carried the specific flat authority of a man who has been doing this job for 25 years, "Senior Corporal." Darun turned to face him. "This platform is under GTA jurisdiction. I'll need to see your transit passes and the grounds for any interaction on this platform." Darun said something to him in a lower voice. I caught Dominion jurisdiction and internal matter. Inspector Halath said, "This is a GTA transit platform. There is no Dominion jurisdiction on this platform. Transit passes, please." The thing about GTA authority is that it's one of those things in the Galactic Accord that everyone agreed on, even when they agreed on almost nothing else. Because without neutral transit infrastructure, the entire galactic economy breaks down, and nobody, not even the Korathi Dominion at the height of its territorial ambitions, wants to be the species that broke transit infrastructure. The political consequences of detaining a member of an Xylarathi noble house on a GTA transit platform without proper authorization were, I knew even then, the kind of consequences that end careers and reopen old agreements. Darun knew this too. He looked at me one more time. The smile was still there. I hadn't let it go, even now. Then he nodded to the other 2 soldiers and they left, walked back toward the East Access Corridor, unhurried, dignified, the way a very contained and very professional unit retreats when they've made a strategic decision to leave. Darun was last. He walked past me close enough that I could feel the displaced air. He didn't look at me again. After. Inspector Halath watched them go. Then he turned to me with an expression of profound and weary disapproval. He said, "Warrant officer." I said, "Inspector." He said, "Your cargo container is unsecured on the platform." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "That is a violation of Tech Shipping Protocol Section 14, Subsection 6, and GTA Transit Platform Regulation 31. I said, "Yes, sir." He looked at me for a long moment and then said, with the resignation of a man who has decided this is simply his life, "Go secure your container, please." "Yes, sir." I turned to walk away. I had gone about 4 steps when I heard her voice. It was different from what I'd heard before, that formal, authority-carrying tone she'd used with the soldiers. This was quieter. It had a different texture to it. Xylarathi voices have a slight harmonic quality, a second resonance running underneath the fundamental pitch, and when they're speaking formally, it's controlled and minimal. When they're speaking without formality, it opens up, becomes fuller, and it's genuinely one of the more beautiful sounds I've encountered in 6 years of traveling the galactic systems. she said in perfect standard galactic, "Warrant officer." I stopped, turned back. She was looking at me with those primary eyes, deep blue, xylarathi blue, the kind of color that exists nowhere in the natural world except in their eyes and in deep ocean water on cold days. The secondary eyes at her temples were still, which meant whatever she was feeling, she had settled it. She said, "You smiled." I said, "I did." She said, "You were afraid." I said, "Also yes." She looked at me for a moment the way someone looks at a piece of a puzzle that doesn't fit the shape they expected. Then she said, "Why did you smile then?" I thought about it for a second. The honest answer was the one I gave her. Because I didn't want them to know. XII, the conversation. She asked me to sit. There was a waiting area about 30 feet back from the observation rail, a cluster of seating built for multiple species, which means it accommodates everything from 6-inch gravathi to 12-foot sorvath, which means most of the seating is either too large or too small for any individual species, and everyone uses it anyway. We sat in the ones that were closest to human-sized, which on xylarathi dimensions left her sitting with her knees at approximately the same height as my shoulders, but she seemed unbothered by this. Inspector Halath stood nearby with the visible patience of a man who has accepted that his paperwork is going to take twice as long today. Her name was Eranthis Vel Sorathu. She was the third daughter of the Sorathu Federacy House, which places her, she explained with a kind of matter-of-fact precision, at position 7 in the Xylarathi Federation's line of dynastic consideration. Not the heir, but close enough to matter, close enough for the Korathi Dominion to consider her a leverage point in the current territorial negotiations. She had been traveling with a security escort. Her security escort had, it turned out, been separated from her at the Platform 7 transfer, a separation that, Inspector Halath told us later in his flat reporting voice, appeared to have been deliberately facilitated. Someone had triggered a transit alert at Platform 7. Her escort had responded. She had been moved. She had been on Platform 9 for 6 minutes before I arrived. "I knew what they intended," she said. "A detained noble house member creates a negotiating weight. They were not going to harm me. They were going to take me somewhere I could be officially discovered." I said, "Is that better or worse than the other options?" She considered this. Politically, it is precisely calibrated. For me personally, it is considerably worse than simply catching my transit connection and going home. I said, "Right." She looked at me again in that evaluating way. "Your species has been in the Galactic Accord for 60 years. I said, 63 technically. 63 years, she said. In that time, most of what other species have learned about humans is that you are persistent, that you solve problems by continuing to engage with them past the point where other species would stop. I said, that's a diplomatic way to say stubborn. I did not mean it as a criticism, she said, and then something happened that I was not expecting. She smiled. Xylarathi smiles look slightly different from human ones. The muscle structure is different. It's more of a broadening of the face than a curling of the lips, but the warmth in it is completely recognizable. I was told by my secondary tutor that humans were difficult to predict because they follow their values more consistently than their interests. I did not understand what this meant when I was young. Do you understand it now? She said, you left an unsecured military cargo container on a GTA transit platform to run toward 3 Korathi soldiers with no weapon and no backup, because you saw something that was wrong. I said, when you put it like that, it sounds like poor planning. It was poor planning, she said. It was also the only thing that worked. XII. The machines again. My cargo container was, mercifully, where I'd left it. The sensor tag was still beeping. Nobody had interfered with it. I got the handoff paperwork signed in docking bay 47 31 minutes later than scheduled. The dock officer gave me a look that expressed everything he needed to say about tech personnel who were late without offering an explanation. I said I was sorry for the delay. He processed the paperwork. By the time I got back to Bay 12, the Terran forward was running departure sequencing. My lieutenant, a tall, methodical woman named Vassar, who runs the most efficient logistics operation in the 3rd Battalion, and who has a specific expression for when her people have been doing things she's going to have to deal with later, was standing at the bay entrance. She said, "Calloway." I said, "Lieutenant." She said, "There's a GTA incident report with your name on it." I said, "Yes." She said, "It says you left a secured military cargo container unattended on a transit platform." I said also yes. She looked at me. "What happened?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The container was still there when you got back." I said yes. She said, "And the Korathi soldiers left." I said yes. She looked at me with the expression she uses when the answer to a problem is technically satisfactory, but the methodology was sufficiently chaotic that she needs to decide how she feels about it. Then she said, "You smiled at them." I said, "It seemed like the right move." She was quiet again. Then, "Get on the ship, Calloway." XIV, the signal. 3 days later, still in transit to Terran Forward Command at Nexus 9, I received a comm signal. It came through the official diplomatic channel, not the military line, not the standard crew comm. The diplomatic channel, which the Terran Forward technically has because all tech vessels of our class carry one for emergency protocol, but which almost nobody ever uses because the actual diplomats have their own ships and their own channels, and they don't need logistics transport vessels cluttering up their frequencies. It was short, text only. It said, "Warrant Officer Calloway, the Sarathu House has formally noted your intervention on Platform 9, Vidian Station, at the 14th rotation of the Cold Drift, SG year 4417. A record of commendation has been entered in the Xylarathi Federation's diplomatic register. You will find this has no practical effect on your day-to-day life. However, it means that in any port where the Federation maintains diplomatic presence, you may request assistance and it will be given. We do not forget who stood beside us." AVS. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, because I wanted to make sure I understood what "no practical effect on your day-to-day life" meant coming from the third daughter of a noble house in a 7 billion member interstellar federation. And I was pretty sure it didn't mean what it would mean if a civilian said it. I showed it to Lieutenant Vassar. She read it twice. Then she said, "Calloway." "Lieutenant, did you know who she was when you ran across that platform?" "No," I said. "I just saw someone who needed help." She looked at the message again. Then she handed the comm back to me with the expression she uses when she has decided something is acceptable, but reserves the right to reassess later. "Try not to make a habit of it," she said. I said, "I'll do my best." We both knew I wouldn't. XV ending. There's a thing that happens, I've noticed, in the months after you do something that matters. People want to know what it felt like. They want to know if you were scared, if you hesitated, if you had a plan. They want to find the seam where the heroism started, because they've built this idea that bravery is a switch you flip, and on the other side of it is clarity and purpose and forward momentum. What they don't want to hear, but what is true, is that there's no switch. There's just a moment when something in front of you is wrong, and your body and your values and 63 years of your species' slow, difficult, sometimes embarrassing integration into the galactic community all arrive at the same answer simultaneously, and you move. You move before you've finished deciding if it's a good idea. You smile because you're too busy being afraid to manage anything more complicated. You stand there for 7.4 minutes because that is exactly as long as it takes for the situation to resolve itself. And you stay there because you don't know how to be the kind of person who walks away. I've thought about it a lot since then, about what Eranthes said, that humans follow their values more consistently than their interests. I don't know if that's entirely true. I think we follow both, and sometimes they happen to be pointing in the same direction. And when that happens, you get something that looks from the outside like courage and feels from the inside like a decision you didn't quite make in time to be proud of it. But I'll tell you this. Every time I walk through a transit platform now, I look around. Not anxiously, just the way you look when you've learned that the ordinary chaos of a crowded place can, in an instant, arrange itself into something that requires you. I keep the lucky coin in my left boot. And I keep the smile practiced. Because the galaxy is large, and it has no shortage of moments when a human standing in the wrong place, at exactly the right time, is the only variable the situation didn't account for. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything.